her husband Jacob. Did y'all hear that? Ain't no way that one of y'all gonna give your husband to another woman. Not this day and time. It's just not gonna happen, especially a black woman. Ain't finna happen. But this is what they did. And they made this seem almost, normal. And so Jacob, in exchange for they did this in exchange for some mandrakes. Some mandrakes in Genesis 30, 14 through 18. But like Issachar, very little is said about Zebulun in the scriptures, but members of the tribe of Issachar were often called upon as fighters for Israel after the people entered Canaan. And so verse 24 says, and the son of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin, here are listed to the two sons of Rachel. The first one was Joseph. Y'all know who Joseph is. And because he was loved by his father, Jacob, his brothers, listen, they hated him. All because this is favoritism. The father showed more love to him than he did the other brothers. That made them jealous. That made them really angry. And they hated it so much that they were willing to kill him. But to keep from killing him, they sold him. That ain't about to happen with us. Y'all ain't finna sell me. That ain't gonna happen. But this happened back then, and they sold him, and they sold him, and they took him into slavery. They took him into slavery to traveling merchants for, listen, 20 pieces of silver. For 20 pieces of silver. And listen, we know today a person can be so desperate, they hung up on all these the drugs and things that they're in. They'll do anything to get the fix. So they might not have no silver, but they're going to sell something to get that fix. So 20 pieces of silver, and then they took Joseph into slavery in Egypt. But listen, this is the blessing. You got to hear this blessing. Under the watchful eye of God, he got blessed. Under the watchful eye of God, God put him in a position, his leadership position in Egypt, and he made it possible for him to be able to save the entire unknown world and his family, the ones who wanted to kill him, the ones who sold him into slavery. He was able to save them from the famine that was taking place. But I know these brothers was mad because, Joseph had that dream that they would bow down to him. God has a watchful eye on us. It says no matter what we're going through, no matter what your circumstances are, God watches over his children. And so look what it says. It says, Joseph, after suffering so many adversities, it says, became a leader in Egypt. He became a leader. God has a plan for us. No matter what you've gone through, no matter what's happening in your life, God can still use you. God still has a reason and a purpose for our lives. And so listen, Benjamin was Rachel's youngest son, who, when Joseph's brothers came to Egypt to buy food during the famine, he learned that he had a younger brother back in Canaan. And so desiring to see him, Joseph told his other brothers to prove that they were not there as spies, because he didn't really know why they were there. And so to prove that they were there to take care of business, to get food for the family because of the famine, he told them, leave one of the brothers there. And then you go back and bring Benjamin back. Because he wanted to see Benjamin. He had a brother that he wanted to see. And so they went. They returned to Canaan and to bring him back. And it says, then they could do business in Egypt and buy food. Saul, Israel's first king, came from the tribe of Benjamin. And so listen here, the writer introduces the two sons of Bela, Rachel's handmaid. It says, when Rachel discovered that she could not have children, she gave Bela, her handmaid, which was her servant, to her husband Jacob as a surrogate, so that she could bear him children. Again, doing what only God should be able to do, but she took it upon herself and gave another woman to her husband. Rachel named Bella's first son Dan, which means judging. And she gave him this name because she said, God had judged me and had judged and had also heard my voice and had given me a son. And therefore called she his name Dan. Bella's second son by Jacob was named Nephtali. Very little is said about him, but the tribe that descended from him, they were brave and they were warriors. Judges 5 and 18. And the sons of Zilpah, Leah's handmaid, Gad and Aser. These are the sons of Jacob which were born to him in Pandaram. The last two of Jacob's 12 sons presented here were the sons of Zilpah, Leah's handmaid. And just like Rachel did, she did the same thing, y'all. When Leah could no longer conceive, there she go. I tell y'all, Jacob was somebody. Jacob could handle a whole bunch of women. And they were just given to him by these women who could no longer conceive children to be able to become pregnant. And so she was a servant girl to Jacob she sent him as another surrogate to bear him more children. And so the first one was named Gad, which literally means a troop. And so the second son that she bore was to Jacob was named Aser, which literally means happy. And so she gave him this name because it said that happy am I, for the daughters will call me blessed. And she called his name Aser. But the last part of this verse said, these are the sons of Jacob which were born to him in Pandaram. Benjamin was not actually born there, which means the plan of Syria, or Sariah, it says, and was in the area northern of Mesopotamia surrounding Haran. And so it says here where Jacob lived, he lived there for 20 years. And he lived there with his uncle Laban, Rachel and Leah's father. Benjamin was born in Bethlehem after Jacob and his family arrived in Canaan. Therefore, the statement there, these are the sons of Jacob that were born to him in Pandaram, must be understood as a general review of all 12 sons and who were born to Jacob during the general time in his sojourn. And the immediate time after in Bethlehem. That's what took place in the first outline. It was his lineage, and then it was a deception. And the deception, y'all got to hear this. What's finna come up next? This blew my mind of what a family will go through. All of this wickedness and trickery and all of these things that this family was doing. But we can't be too surprised because we do the same thing. We got some families that's doing this. And so listen, we're going to go into chapter 38 now. And chapter 38, it tells us, it introduces us to Tamar. And Tamar was pregnant. But listen, y'all. It says, and it came to pass after 3 months after, that it was told Judah, saying, Tamar, thy daughter-in-law, had played the harlot, and also, behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, bring her forth and let her be burned. That was the punishment. But listen, it says the second part of our lesson, it moves to chapter 38. But however, in chapter 36, the writer gives a record of the descendants of Esau, Jacob's brother. In chapter 37, the writer records the experience of Joseph from the time that he had a dream and his brothers bowing down to him, to the time that he was sold by his brothers to the traveling merchants who took him into slavery. And so this, our text tells us, and it came to pass about 3 months after that it was told Judah, saying, Tamar, thy daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. She played a game on him, y'all. She set him up, and she set him up real pretty, you know. And so these are the things that happen when you make somebody mad, when you don't keep your words, when you don't keep your promise. That's why it's not good for us to make promises. Not us. Because anything can happen and we'll break our promises. And so, listen, it says, we are now introduced to Tamar. She was the wife of Judah's oldest son, listen, who God killed because he was wicked in the sight of the Lord. Now, I know that sounds strange, because when I read that, it sounds strange to me. God killed somebody because they were wicked. Did that wake anybody up? You might not get killed because of your wickedness, but God is going to allow some things to take place in our lives when we become wicked, because he's just not a God for that. And so he killed him. He killed him. And so listen, it says later, Judah told his second son, Onai, to marry Tamar, his brother's widow, and raise up children for his dead brother realizing, listen, that the child would not be his, but his dead brother's. And so whenever Onai had intercourse with his Tamar, so he was married, she belonged to him. It says he would spill his seed on the ground to prevent conception, so that he would not have a child for his brother. That is simply saying, now they were married, so they were able to have sexual intercourse, but he pulled out, y'all. He just simply pulled out. He did not want to have any children with this woman. But look at what happened. It says, but this displeased the Lord. The Lord was displeased with this since he was so displeased, so he killed Onai also. He took him out because of what he was doing. Because really, that made him just as wicked as his brother. This is your wife. Why would you do your wife like that? And so God was displeased. The Lord was displeased. Then Judah told Tamar, listen, this is where the problem came in, to go stay with her father and remain a widow until his youngest son was old enough to marry her. And so listen, years passed, and Tamar had no husband to take care of her and to keep it appeared that Judah had gone back on his promise. He lied to her, y'all. He told her that, go home, wait for my son to become old enough, and he will be your husband. Well, he lied. And so since that happened, it says that Tamar disguised herself, went where Judith was, where he was tending to his sheep. When he saw Tamar and the way she was dressed, he assumed that she was a prostitute. And he asked her to have sex with him. How many times do we disguise ourselves? How many times are we going to dress up to be somebody else and not be ourselves? And we dress up, professing to be Christians. We put on our suits, we put on our dresses and our hats, and we come to the house of God, and we put on this false persona of who we are. And it's not who we are. And so, listen, I identified with what she was doing because she was angry. And this is what causes us to do things when we are angry. And so Judith promised to send her one of his goats as a payment for sex. But before they had intercourse, Tamar requested that he give her a pledge to confirm that he would pay her. So I don't know, in a way it kind of seemed like prostitution was almost legal. And the reason why I say that is because it says Tamar requested that he give her a pledge. Well, Judah agreed and gave her his signet, his bracelet, and his staff as a pledge to pay her. But after they had intercourse, Tamar conceived. She got pregnant, y'all, right away. And she returned to her father's house and she put back on her widow clothes. So she went from grieving to trickery. She gonna trick her father-in-law into getting her pregnant. Well, it worked. And so she put back on her widow clothes. And then Judah sent a friend to the place where he met the prostitute to give her the goat that he promised to pay her with and to get his pledges back. So the one thing I got out of this is that he kept his promise. But the first time his promise, he broke it. Now, to the prostitute, he was willing to keep his word. Something seems a little backwards, but he was willing to keep his word. And so listen. It says here that he wanted to make sure she got the goat because he didn't want to be mocked. He was worried about people talking about him for not paying the prostitute. He didn't have no concern about what he did to his daughter-in-law. But he didn't want nobody mocking him because he didn't pay this prostitute. That's what made me think that it had to be legal. Because you paying a prostitute and you worried about people saying what happened or why you didn't pay her. You worried about people mocking you because you didn't give up a goat to a prostitute. So he was more concerned about his name. And so it's just something that we really need to keep away from. And so receiving word, this sense that he couldn't find the prostitute, he told his friends to let her keep the pledge so people wouldn't mark him. And so it came to pass after 3 months, referred to the time that had passed since Judah tried to find the prostitute. He tried for 3 months to find her, and he couldn't. It says, who we now know was actually Tamar, his daughter-in-law. And so it was that time that Judah received word that Tamar, the daughter-in-law, had played the harlot. She played a game on him. And also, behold, she was with child by whoredom. And so since Tamar was still living with her father, people reasoned that the only way she could become pregnant was by committing an immoral act. And in this case, she played the harlot, and she is with child by whoredom. And what this meaning is that the immoral act of prostitution. So Judith replied to the news, saying, bring her forth and let her be burned. He was still ready to burn her. But what about him? What about him? She wasn't in this by herself. He's the one who got her pregnant. And so he replied saying, bring her forth and let her be burned. This was the harshest punishment that could be pronounced on her because it meant that Tamar would be burned to death. And so some scholars think that the word let her be burned simply means that she would be scorched by burning forever, indicating that she committed prostitution. However, it says this is only speculation. So even though this was before the law was given, it says it is still more likely that Judith was speaking of an actual death by burning, since later, under the Masonic law, this was the prescribed punishment for harlotry. And so it's interesting that Judith called for the death of Tamar because of her presumed immorality when he was the one who got her pregnant. However, the truth was about to come out. And here's the truth. In verse 25, it says, when she was brought forth, she sent to her father-in-law saying, by the man who these are, am I with child? And she said, discern, I pray thee, whose are these, the signet, the bracelet, and the staff? And so upon Judah's demand to bring Tamar to be burned, when she was brought forth by the man who these are, am I with child? While she was being brought out of her father's house, Tamar took these things Judah had given her as a pledge to pay for sex and sent them along with a message to him, her father-in-law, saying, I am pregnant by the man to whom these articles belong. She had evidence, y'all. She was very smart. She wasn't no dumb woman. She knew how to play the game. And she asked for evidence, and him not really thinking, he gave her the evidence. But he was keeping his promise. He was going to give her the goat. And so he was just letting her know, I'm a man of my word. So I'm going to give you these things. And so he did it to pay for the sex. But listen, it says, it's true that the wickedness that has been most secretly committed and hidden is sometimes strangely brought to the light. So to the shame and the confusion of those who claim no guilt, then Tamar said, discern, I pray thee, whose are these, the signet, the bracelet, and the staff? In other words, she begged Judah to examine the items, and he would know to whom they belonged. He knew they was his, because he knew who he gave them to. And so now we see why Tamar requested these items from Judah when he thought that he was paying for a prostitute. And so it says that she did it because those items would be easily identified by the owner. And a signet was a stone. It was a stone that was engraved with a seal that would leave an imprint when pressed on a surface. Then, it says, they were normally wore as rings. Bracelets were worn around a person's wrist, and the staff was the rod used when herding animals. And so all three of these items, especially the staff, would have an inscription that identified the owner. So he couldn't lie, y'all. He couldn't say he didn't do. He couldn't say that's not me. She had him right where she needed him. And so verse 26 says, and Judith acknowledged them and said, she has been more righteous than I, because that I gave her not to my son, and he knew her again no more. And so once Judith examined the items, he acknowledged them and said, she has been more righteous than I. And so it says Judith acknowledged them means that he recognized the items and he knew who he had given them to. But so when Judith said that Tamar had been more righteous than him, listen, he was not absorbing her from her actions, which were deceptive and immoral. He was saying that she had been more righteous doing the whole matter than he had, because that I gave her not my son. It's simply put that Judith was saying she was right and I was wrong. He was admitting that he was wrong, because I did not give her my son like I promised. None of this would have taken place if he just would have kept his word. And what that is suggesting to us is keep your word, church. When you tell somebody what you're going to do it. Because if you don't, things like this can happen to you. So keep your word. And so the last part of this lesson says, and he knew her again no more. In other words, Judah did not have intimate relations with Tamar as his daughter-in-law again. A good lesson here is that those who truly repent of their sins will also forsake them. And so Judith was already guilty of fornication. And so to have sexual intercourse with his daughter-in-law again would make him guilty of incest. And we know that happens today. Incest is going on today. It's happening. And so we're going to our last outline. I got about 5 minutes on. Let me go as fast as I can through this. It says here that the third part of our lesson comes from chapter 49. Chapter 39 through 48 covered Joseph's experience in Egypt with his brothers, his father, and bringing them all to Egypt to be with him. And so listen, it says Jacob began to give prophecy concerning his 12 sons. As part of this prophecy concerning his sons, Judah, the verse says, the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be.